Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be recording a tutorial on how to convert SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 models for use in WWE 2K14. I previously recorded a tutorial on how to convert 2008 to 2011 models for use in 2K14. However, the 2007 models are a slightly different format. Therefore, this method will not work with these models. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is go into our settings. Ensure that the rotate model on export is set to false. And we also want to ensure that export Y object normals is set to true. The reason why we set this to true is because we're going to export the normals which are currently present in the file when we are creating our new Y object. By doing so, you will eliminate any seams in the model where you find that different meshes are joined together to make body parts. Alright, we're going to click on Save Settings. Okay, then we're going to click on Export All, and we're going to export this into a folder. I've created a folder called Meshes. So I'm going to click on Select Folder, and this will export the meshes. Alright, now we're going to go and create a new Y object. So new Y object, Xbox 360 PS3. Alright, we're going to select the Justin Gabriel model, which is the 2K14 base, like with our other tutorials. Then we're going to select all of the meshes that we've just exported. Okay, X-Ray 5.1 allows you to create a custom Y object using object files. Using a custom tri-stripper which I've coded. However, this tri-stripper is about 90% accurate, with the other 10% producing meshes which are flipped the opposite way around. So these meshes, when flipped the opposite way around, will appear see-through or transparent in the game. So in order to overcome this, we're going to create a test Y object before we do anything. So let's click on Create Y object. Okay, and we're just going to call this test. Alright, so now we're going to open up the test Y object file using a second instance of X-Ray. So let's open up a second instance of X-Ray. We leave this dialog the way it is. Okay, we open up the test Y object, which is the new format. So we're going to click on Ctrl+N, and we're going to go into the test object. Alright, so go into settings, and then there's an option that says display Y object flip faces. Set this to true, and then click Save Settings. Okay, reload your model, and let's look for any objects that are flipped the wrong way around. You'll notice that some of them already appear corrupt, so let's go through each object. So 0 is fine. Okay, if it looks corrupt on the opposite side, you don't need to worry about that, as long as it looks correct from the front. Okay, so you can see that object 4 is incorrect, so we need to flip these the other way around. So the way in which we do this is we go into the meshes folder, and object 4, at the end of the name of object 4, we're going to put in the word force, _force. This tells X-Ray that we should force the orientation of the mesh to flip the other way around. Object 5, 6, 7. Okay, object 10 is the wrong way as well, so let's change that. (13) also looks to be the wrong way around, so let's change 13. (14) is fine. Okay, 16 is the wrong way around, so let's change that to force. 18 is the wrong way around. Okay, and the remainder of the files actually look correct. So let's go back into our first instance of X-Ray. Click on Select Meshes again. Let's select all of the meshes again. And let's create another Y object. We're going to call it Test. Overwriting the old one. Okay, let's open up the Y object again in our second instance and just make sure that everything is correct. Alright, and you can see that all of the meshes are displaying correctly. So go back into the first instance of X-ray, and now we need to assign the weight counts. So with the Xbox 360, the weight counts must be set to 4. Okay. Alright, and then thereafter we need to assign the correct shaders to the meshes. So we can open up the second instance again just to confirm what each mesh is. So let's open up the test Y object that we created initially, and let's go through the meshes. So object 1 is a teeth. So we can select the teeth shader. Okay, we can also assign the name to tooth. Okay, this is the tongue, so let's give it a skin shader. Let's give it a body, it's fine. This is a mouth guard, so let's give it a gear shader. The gear shoe shader will be fine for this purpose. Okay, it's 3 and 4 are the face objects, so let's set these to face. Five is the top of the head, so also let's give that the face shader. Okay, so objects 6 to 12 are body objects, so let's set these to body. Okay, 13 is the mouth bag, so we can also set that to a body shade, that's fine. 14 is the body shade as well. Okay, so 15 to 20 is gear, so the default shaders are fine. Don't need to worry about that. And then the last option we have is the eye, which is object 21. So I'll just set that as eye, and we can also change the mesh name to eye. All right, with everything set correctly, we can create a Y object, and we can override the test Y object. Okay, leave this dialog open and open up the second instance again, just to make 100% sure that everything is correct. Alright, so we've used the meshes that we've exported from the old Y object to create a new Y object, because using X-ray we are also exporting the normals. If we use 3D Studio Max to export the normals, we're going to lose the normals and you will see the seam between the meshes. Alright, so now we want to convert the angled Y object file to the newer format. So we're going to go into Utilities, and we're going to select the option that says convert less than 2009 model. Alright, and we're going to select this 6.y object file. Okay, this will take some time to run, but it will actually go through the Y object file. It will read the old format and then convert the headers and the mesh format to match that of the new format. In doing so, we will be able to import this into 3D Studio Max. Alright, so this will convert the file for us. So if we click on Ctrl+N, you'll see that there's a file called 6_converted. We can open this in XSeries and just to confirm that it has been converted correctly. So now we're going to go into 3D Studio Max and import this model. So we're going to run the script. WWE 2K12 to 2K17 Xbox 360 _Tekken57. Make sure you use the one that is _Tekken57 because the rotation and the naming of the files will be correct. Okay, and then we select the file that we are going to use. Okay, and it's 6 converted. Okay, while that is running, we're also going to open up the Justin Gabriel model, and we're going to export these meshes because we're going to use these to align our new model too. So while this is open, Ctrl+N, we're going to click on Export All, create a new folder, call it Gabriel Meshes. Alright, and export these into that folder. Alright, so now we have all of the meshes imported. So we're going to go into the option at the bottom which says sort by layer. So everything has been imported onto layer 0. So we're going to click on the create new layer option. Alright, and we can call it Gabriel because we're going to import the Gabriel meshes to this. It doesn't matter what you name it. Alright, with this layer selected, we're going to import all the meshes. Now I have a script which is the batch importer and exporter. This allows us to import multiple object files at once. So let's go into the Gabriel Meshes folder, select that, and give the script all the files in that folder. Alright, so let's do this. Okay, it's going to give you like a naming conflict, so just click on rename all and click OK. Alright, so you can see that the Gabriel model is substantially bigger than the angle model that we've just imported. So now we're going to go back into the sort by hierarchy option, and we're going to scale the model to be the same size as the Justin Gabriel model. So we're going to right click on we're going to click on root, and we are going to right click on scale and uniform size. We're going to change the offset world to 1000, which is 10 times the size. Alright, that's going to increase the size of our mesh. Then we're also going to move this up to align it with the Justin Gabriel model. Around about there looks correct. Okay, then we need to align the arms and the legs to fit the Justin Gabriel model as well. So let's go into the arms and legs models. Okay, and we're going to just rotate these to fit. Alright, if you're having difficulty with the names, not to worry, let's actually come back to the positioning. We're going to run a script which is going to rename the bones so that these have the same naming convention as the 2K14 model. So we're going to go into scripting, run script, and we're going to use the rename bones script. Okay, there was a script which I created which was edited by Aries619, so let's use Aries adapted script. So this script is going to ask you for a bone dictionary which we can use. So I've provided you a bone dictionary in the link below. So use the bone dictionary which is supplied. Alright, so now you'll notice that all of the bones have been named. Alright, so let's go into the shoulder bones, and let's rotate those as well. So let's go into upper arm. Okay, right side as well. Okay, so then let's go into the forearm bones, and let's rotate that as well. So let's select the forearm bone and rotate that as well, so that this is aligned. Check from the front. Okay, left forearm we do the same thing. Okay, let's see if the upper arm needs a little bit more adjustment as well. If that's correct. Let's just make sure on the right side as well. Okay, so now that we're happy with the alignment, we are ready to export the weights, the bone names, and the meshes. So the reason why we are exporting the meshes is because we have now scaled the meshes up, and we can import these directly into our YObject file. So let's go back into the layers and let's hide the Gabriel layer. We don't need those anymore. And then let's go back to sort by hierarchy. So this will give you a list of bones. This will give you a list of meshes which you can export. So let's select those, and we're going to go into the batch exporter again. Alright, so let's go back to our tutorial folder, and let's create a new folder called scaled meshes. Okay, let's select that folder, and let's export these into that folder. Click on the export selection button. Okay, and then you click export. Okay, so I've exported this into a directory called scaled meshes. Alright, so we can open up the test YObject that we've created again, and we can import these meshes directly into the test YObject file. So let's click on inject all objects, and we can go into the scaled meshes folder and then click select folder. Okay, this will import the meshes into the model for you. Alright, so you'll notice that the model has been scaled and the pose of the model has been changed as well. Alright, so now we're going to export the weights and the mesh names. So select all of the objects. We're going to go into scripting, run script, and we're going to select export bone names to file multiple, which is going to export the bones that the meshes are mapped to. Okay, so let's create another folder called bone names. Alright, and then we're also going to export the weights, which is going to be the rigging for the mesh. Okay, so we're going to run the script export bone weights to file multiple, and then we're going to go into another folder. We're going to call this weights. We're going to select that folder. Alright, so now we can go back into our test model, which is already open. Alright, so now you right click on the any of the meshes, and you click on import weights for all meshes 360 PS3. Okay, so then select the weights. Okay, then secondly we want to import the bone names, so we're going to select the import bone names for all meshes by right clicking and selecting it from the context menu. Okay, we're going to go into bone names, and we're going to select that as well. Alright, so now your model is ready for use in game. However, there's one additional step that you need to perform, is that the UVs of the meshes have to be remapped. The reason for this is because if you look at the textures for the 2007 models, there are separate textures for each of the meshes. head, body, shoes, etc. Whereas if you look at the texture maps for a 2K14 model, you'll notice that a single texture map is applied for the color and for the normal maps. Alright, so unfortunately you are going to have to recreate a texture map for this. So I've done this for the cut angle mode, where you'll notice that I've taken all of the textures and I've placed them on a single map. Thereafter you will now have to go and remap the UVs of the meshes that we are now using for the YObject file. So before we do that, let's just make sure that the model is actually using the correct materials. Alright, so I've created separate textures for the color, for the normals, and I've also created a unified map for the alpha channel, which you can see here. Alright, so these are all combined into a single texture map. So what we need to do firstly is to ensure that the meshes in the model are actually referencing the correct texture. So let's open this with the texture saved in the directory, and we can open up our test YObject. Alright, so you can see it's referencing textures, but let's just make sure that it's referencing the correct textures. So what you want to do is open Edit Materials. Alright, so look at what textures are assigned in the Edit Materials. You look at color and normal, those are the important ones. So you notice that color is 0 and normal is 2. You're looking at the values in hex. So therefore when you edit the shader parameters, the meshes must be referencing 0 and 2. So let's check what these values are assigned to. So let's right click and we're going to select Edit Shader Params. The diffuse param is set to 0, which is correct. However, the normal parameter is set to 0, 1. So what you can do is you can either set this value here to 2, and this will reference the correct normal map. Alternatively, you can also change the values in the material list. So this might be a quicker option because you have quite a few meshes which are referencing the normal map as map number 1. So let's just close this without saving anything. Let's just check one of the other meshes as well to see if it's doing the same thing. So Edit Shader Params. If you look at the diffuse param, it's 0 and the normal is 1. So you'll notice that it's all referencing the normal map as 1. So let's go into Edit Materials and change it here rather than changing it in the shader parameters. You can do either option, but this is a slightly faster option. So let's copy the cube map eyes and put it into Notepad. Okay, let's just paste that in there so we don't lose the name. Okay, so let's copy normal and paste this over cube map eyes, and let's take cube map eyes and paste it over normal. So in doing so, you'll notice that now normal is the texture map number 1. Okay, you click Save Changes. If you do not assign it a normal map to the model, you'll notice that the models appear very shiny in game, or you may have other issues with displays. Alright, so in doing so, now we've fixed the material IDs which are assigned. Alright, so the last thing left to do is to remap the UVs. So the way in which you need to do this is to open up the meshes that you've exported. So let's go into Import. Let's browse and let's import those scale meshes that we've just imported. Okay, and let's do this. Alright, with all of the meshes selected, let's just assign a texture to it. So let's take our color texture and let's just drag it over all of the meshes that we have in the game. So let's select all of the meshes, Control A, and let's just drag this over to all of the meshes that we have assigned. Okay, then open up the material editor, pressing M, and then select the texture that we've just assigned. Alright, so now select all of the meshes again and drag this to the meshes. Click on the Assign to Selection. This will assign the meshes to this will assign the texture to all of the meshes. So I'm just going to quickly do these two meshes just to demonstrate how UV mapping should be done. So let's select both of them and we click on modifiers and unwrap UVW. Okay, let's open up the UV editor. Okay, here we're going to select the texture map that we have assigned, which is color.png. Alright, we have the face object, which you can see. So let's select the entire face object, which is Control plus A, and then thereafter we can scale this object to fit into the texture map that we've placed our face textures into. Okay, this takes a little bit of time to do to get it 100%. I'm just going to roughly do it to give you an idea of what it should look like. You can just view this in your display port as well, see if this looks correct. Okay, that for me that looks fine. Alright, and then you need to do the same for all of the other meshes as well. When you are done with these, when you are done with the UV unwrapping of all the meshes, select all of the meshes that you've unwrapped, and once again export these. So let's create another folder for this. So let's call it UV unwrap meshes. Alright, and let's put this in there. Okay, and click on select folder. Alright, and now we've exported all of the meshes to this folder. Alright, so we can I'll just import the ones that I've unwrapped so you can take a look. So it's object 3 and object 4. So let's go into our model again. Control+N if you don't have it open. Okay, and let's go into object 3 and 4. And let's go into UV unwrap meshes. Let's import that. Alright, so you can see that the head is now displaying the correct texture, and it also has the correct UV mappings. Okay, I'm not going to do the same for all of the others just to save time. Let's just run a quick test on this in the game. So open up the pack file that you're using. I'm using the Mrs pack file just to test, and let's compress and inject this using Xpacker. So let's go to our test Y object. Okay, I'm using compress and inject so that I don't need to update the arc. If you're not using compress and inject, remember to update the arc file, otherwise the game will crash when you try and select the model. So let's copy this. And paste it into our game folder. Okay, which is the pack ch folder. Let's paste this in there. Alright, so I'm using the Xenia emulator to test. So let's open up the Xenia emulator and run the game. Okay, so loading the model in game, you'll notice that the model works without issue. The UV remap that we've done is working correctly, and the textures are loading correctly. Alright, that brings us to the end of the tutorial. I hope this tutorial has been helpful to you, and until next time, happy modding and take care.